As from the previous video, after the third move by white, knight f3, bishop g4 follows. A move that is actually quite popular but not very correct is knight e5 now. White can try this move because he doesn't want his pawn structure to be broken, or simply to attack the bishop and try the usual exchange of the knight for the bishop. This knight must be taken. Pawn takes back, and now the move to continue is e6. Also because it looks like this pawn can be taken, because then queen takes queen and then rook takes back is favorable for black. But actually the queen will go to a4 with a check. After queen d7, queen will take the pawn. It's just annoying. It forces black to lose a tempo. So after e6, I'm going to go through pawn takes, but I'm going to start from knight c3. Now a very natural looking move. White also has basically no pieces developed, so he's got to develop something. But now black already attacks with d4. This knight will have to go to e4. Obviously, knight b5 in the attempt of doubling the attack on d4 doesn't work because of a lovely c6 move. Now, taking the pawn would be a mistake by black because of bishop c5. Now, the knight, well, if the knight moves, then the queen will just take the queen. The white player will lose a right to castle. Black will then castle with check, and there's basically no point for white to play like that. So, well, e3 cannot be played because bishop takes queen. So after a move like bishop to e3, white is completely lost. The queen gives a check, and now if white blocks it with the queen, needless to say, bishop b4 wins the game. If white blocks with the bishop, now queen b6, there's a double attack on the knight, and now the queen, unlike before in a5, the queen now is attacking this pawn. So after bishop again to e3, white will lose a pawn, and there will be a super strong attack on the king, and white will lose a lot of material. So after the queen a5 check, the best move for the white player is b4. The reason is that after bishop takes b4, now white can block with the bishop. It will still be losing material, just not as much as before. Now black continues with long castle. Bishop takes bishop comes with a queen check, and black wins the knight for free. Whereas right now the threat is simple. Bishop takes bishop, then queen takes, and then queen takes, king takes, rook takes, knight, and black is up. Material of the game is completely over. One maybe potential attempt of the white player is to attack this bishop in g4, but it comes with no threats. If white wants to unpin the e2 pawn and he can play bishop, he can play pawn to f3, that doesn't change anything. Black just withdraws the bishop, and after a move like e3, which will be possible later on, after a bunch of swaps, this knight will be pinned because queen takes and king takes, and the rook will be pinning the knight, and so the move c5, pawn to c5 will win the knight. But this is all just very easy to see. These are just basic tactics. So going back now, after the move d4, white has to play knight e4, and now black follows with queen d7. The reason is obvious. Black wants the castle alongside, like it happens just the vast majority of times in the Chigorin. So now white proceeds with the engine move, basically the only move that is considered as good as possible by white is g3. The reason is obvious. This bishop has no future from this diagonal because of the pin. So after g3, black goes on with a bunch of moves that need to be explained, but they all make sense, and we'll try to make this defense clear. f5 is the right move now. Now the reason is pretty deep, and I'm going to go through what happens after pawn takes en passant. First of all, it's important to make it clear that this pawn's attacking the knight. The knight is going basically nowhere. Can't go to c3, cannot go to c5, gets taken. Knight d2 here will be really bad, also because it blocks the bishop. This bishop will never be developed. In fact, b3 in this kind of games is not good because of the bishop b4 threat, and this c3 square is completely under the control of the black player. So white will have to keep the b2 pawn where it is if he wants to have a good pawn structure and he doesn't want the game to be over soon. At a knight g5, the knight gets attacked again, so it's pointless. The only active move for the white player, except for en passant, which I will go through in a minute, is pawn to h3, so the black bishop now goes back to h5. It's important to keep the pin. So now white, since it didn't take en passant, meaning it can't do it anymore, knight g5 is forced. After h6 and knight f3, there's no need to rush in taking this knight to break the pawn structure of our opponent. Also because g4 isn't a threat right now because it just gets taken for free. So now black continues with c5, and it's important to understand what's going on right now. With these very accurate moves to remember, the white player is completely backwards with development. The control of the c3 square is granting black much more space and preventing white from developing. This bishop should not develop this way, it's just wrong. It looks like it could be developed now because black doesn't have access to b4 immediately, but the problem is that after c5 and d4, the bishop in b2 will not be working for a very long time and will not be able to reach the square f4 to defend the weak e5 pawn after the knight is taken. And it's a pawn that could be targeted with queen c7, for example. Now, white can try either bishop g2 or pawn to e3. In both cases, black responds with knight e7. So I'm going to go through e3. White will have to at some point challenge the strong space of the black pawns. So e3 makes sense. And now black plays knight e7. White continues with bishop g2, which is the move that I suggested before, but eventually pawn to e3 was coming anyway. And now the black knight reaches the square it wanted to go to since before. It's knight c6. After castling and bishop e7, the game continues, but black's position is superior. The g4 square belongs to black. So does the c3 square and the e4 one. Also, white has a double pawn, and black is threatening to produce a passed pawn. Well, the pawn in d4 cannot be taken because then black just produces a passed pawn very quickly, and it's just too strong. So the best move now for white to continue is b4. The usual move that white plays when it tries to to start an attack on the queen side, also because black's king side isn't really the best for king safety. So black gives up a pawn. Either the knight moves away from the center and white can seize control of it, or black just moves a pawn away from the center and white obtains the same thing. After this move, black continues by taking the pawn, and after a swap, queen takes, and then king takes, and rook d1 with check, and king c7. It looks like white can finally find some harmony in development. So white's got the bishop pair and no more double pawns. Everything looks fine except except white is down a pawn with no compensation. At the current moment, white gets an isolated pawn and black gets a majority on the queen side and an attack on a weak pawn. This is acceptable after taking a knight, and so black's got an advantage of about minus 250, so a very comfortable endgame. So now I'm going to go back to the en passant situation. So earlier, white went on with h3, which was the best move. Black has just played f5. So earlier white played h3. Right now I'm going to go through pawn takes en passant. After this, black takes with the knight, and there's an attack on the knight right now. Again, white is in the exact same situation as before. Knight d2 is just too passive, doesn't make any sense. But the knight is pre-run, so it's got to do something. Knight g5 comes with an attack already, so it doesn't make much sense. And also it could give It could give similar scenarios to the previous situations. Best move is knight takes knight, pawn takes back, and it looks like white has found some sort of compensation, like the fact that black can't castle king side, and now white has a majority on the king side, majority of pawns. So now white will have to play bishop g2. Again, the bishop doesn't have a future from this diagonal. The pawn in e2 is pinned, and white will want to castle this side. So a move like f3 is just ugly. So after bishop g2 and long castle, right now the best move for white is queen b3. This comes with a checkmate threat, and the reason why this is the best move is to be lighted. There's well, white wants to unpin this pawn because it's going to be the future challenger of a very strong pawn. Also, it's in white's interest to take initiative, so with the checkmate threat, and also try and break the pawn, try to mess up with the queen side of the opponent player. The queen side is where the king is castled. A move like b6 would be just unacceptable. Black has to play the only move now, it's c6, which stops the checkmate. If white had played something like h3, this doesn't change anything. Black goes on with bishop to h5, and in the future, and the reason is that this has to still be pinned, this pawn. The future for black pawn is to go to e5, and well, white will have to move the queen somewhere here at some point, because otherwise it will never be able to move this pawn, which is crucial. Afterwards, black has a plan of producing a passed pawn. G4 just makes the white king less safe, because that's the only place where he's going to where he could think of castling. It will be followed by bishop f7, attacking a pawn that once again isn't really easy to be protected because of how bad b3 happens to be in these kind of games. So going back, so the best move now is queen b3. It's followed by c6, and now black's queen side is absolutely fine after a move like h3, also because white still can't castle due to the fact it loses a pawn. So bishop h5, g4, and now bishop g6. Obviously bishop f7 now is pointless because the queen is protecting the pawn in c4. White castles and black continues with rook to g8. There's a difference now between the black situation and the white situation. The white bishop in c1 is absolutely useless. It's got literally nowhere to go except d2, which seems like it makes sense because after bishop d2, rook c1, something like that. But the file is closed, so it just looks like it makes sense, but it doesn't. Black's advantage now is pretty much like 2 pieces difference, and black's attack anyway is going to go from h5. This is the most very easily spottable move. This move is there to take the pawn and well, put more pressure on g4. If pawn takes, then there's going to be a rook on an open file. The queen is going, the bishop is moving away, and black's going to win very quickly. G5 is followed by pawn takes, and then bishop takes, and then thematic moves like bishop here. No worries about swapping, simply because black king is safe, white king is not. Swapping whilst the queens are still on the board just makes it much easier for black. Another thing that that can be said in this, like let's say white doesn't want to swap, obviously, because that just makes the job easy for black, and white plays this move in an attempt of closing the file for a bit and maybe organizing some defense. Now here there's a stunning d3 move that comes. This move, well, the queen can't take because of the bishop. This works as an obstacle to allow the queen to h3 at some point. If pawn were to push, then this is a passed pawn that is just too strong. If pawn were to take, and bishop d3 allows a double attack on this, and then allows black to pile up and well, just win easy after rook d1 attacking the bishop. Now black can carry on and just take, and it's just game over. So I'm gonna go through another line now. Earlier in the video, knight c3 was covered, so I'm going to go through what happens after pawn takes pawn. Now black takes with the pawn. Needless to say, knight c3 is followed by d4, and well, a lot of thematic situations that have been seen with the control of the c3 square. So white now can go on with the best move, which is queen b3, attacking this pawn. Typical attack of the queen's gambit players. Also, white decides to just immediately well, in this variation I'm going through what happens when white immediately unpins this e2 pawn and maybe wants to eventually push it, because right now there's no problem in pushing and the bishop could be released. So now black ignores the b7 pawn and plays knight e7. After queen takes, now black continues now with rook b8, attacking the queen, and the queen can either go to a6 or a7. Can't go to c6 or d5 because of the knight, can't stay anywhere on this file because of the rook, so it doesn't make much sense to go to a6 because the queen didn't really come all the way down to the opponent queen side just to grab a pawn and then leave. So the queen might probably want to take the other pawn and continue. Well, if the queen goes to a6, feeling like it's being too greedy, well, black continues with bishop d7 with the idea of playing knight c6 and knight b4 with an attack on c2. Black's already better in this position. It's not a crashing advantage, but it's just fine. And after white's best move, e4, black continues with knight c6. The idea is to take the pawn and also reach this square, depending on how white plays. So going back to when the queen was in b7 and the queen now takes the pawn in a6. I'm going to go through this line now, and after knight c6, the queen is forced to move, let's say a6. The reason is, well, white has to play very accurate. Right now, white has only one piece developed, which is the queen. Nothing else is developed. Black's developed completely, and it's very soon to castle and to grab the pawn there. It's on e5. A move like queen to a4, for example, to attack the bishop will be met by the same thematic that happened in the previous game. This forces white to retreat the queen somewhere back. This pawn is going to be taken, probably even with a discover attack, or if white plays something like queen f4 just to stick to the protection of this pawn, then the game is just getting just nonsensical. After queen e7, the pawn will be recaptured and black is just much better. So after a move like queen d1, this is and knight takes back is possible, although the best move now is bishop to b4 check, going through the usual thematic of the Chigorin games. After bishop d2, well, knight c3 will be met by d4, the knight is pinned, so it will be lost. Knight d2 is pathetic. Bishop d2 is met by queen e7. This is typical. Well, if bishop takes, queen takes with check, again, the knight can't go to c3 because of the pin and the d4 pawn. So if bishop takes and then queen takes, for instance, after the check and then queen takes, king takes, and rook b2, black is completely winning. So also here has to be considered the weakness in b2. So if white doesn't take the bishop but finally starts developing something like e3, this is met by queen takes here with an attack here trying to trap the rook, and black's position is by far superior. So going back to when the queen was around on the queen side, since queen a4 is met by bishop d7 and just like black keeps winning tempos, as I was mentioning earlier, queen a6 is better for white. But now black continues with knight takes pawn, and well, now white has 6 pawns against black's 5 pawns, but again black's development is better. The game will continue with the usual moves. So queen a4, for example, this time is met by c6, and after like even h3, in this case black just goes back to d7 And yes, black continues with the pawn down, but the position is better, and it continues with the usual threats like bishop b4, bishop takes, bishop box, bishop takes, and then the rook is on an open file. Black's one step away from castling, and white's only piece developed is the queen. One more line I'm going to go through after knight c6, and the queen doesn't have to stay on the a file. So if the queen tries something like queen to e3, which is basically the only square available since all of these squares are controlled by black pieces, after this move, well, again, the fact that black did gamble a pawn, well, in this case 2 pawns, finds a good reason when it comes to development. White can now try to just keep a great pawn advantage situation by protecting the pawn, but the development of black played is just much better. Black goes on with knight b4 now. Right now, the problems of the white player are clear. Yes, white is 2 pawns up, but after knight b4, white is forced to play knight a3 to stop this threat, and after d4 and queen e4 and bishop e6, black's absolutely better than white. Black will just go on with moves like bishop c5, short castle. There's a threat in a2 that black can take with the knight. Black's evaluation on the engine is about a piece up at this moment.